Welcome to the Nomad Futurist Podcast, where ideas shape the future and visionaries redefine what's possible. Join us as we dive deep into the evolution of technology, society, and human potential, spotlighting the voices driving change and reimagining our world. Connect with us and join us at media.nomadfuturist.org. The future is a story we write together. Let's kick it off. Here are your hosts, Phil and Nabeel. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabeel Mahmood, calling in from the big island, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Phillip Koblence, calling from the small, landlocked, looks like a postman, Montclair, New Jersey.
And hello, this is Emil Sayegh from Austin, Texas.
Brilliant. Emil, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has been way overdue. We've been trying to get you on for a long time, but evidently you've been quite busy. So let's start to share your story at a high level. Could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? What are you up to these days?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. We always catch up at these conferences. We never quite make the time to do this session, but this is great. I'm currently the CEO of a company called cybersecurity. We are a managed IT, managed security, managed compliance provider that is focused on the defense industrial base. And we specialize in the standard that's called TMMC, and we get people ready for it. It's a big deal right now because the DoD has mandated that all new contracts beginning in November have to comply. The defense contractors have to comply with the standards. So it's quite busy right now because there's an influx of these contractors trying to get certified before the November deadline.
And I would imagine there's more of that coming up going into the next year as well.
Oh, for sure. Of course, it's a journey. So they'll start the journey in November when the contracts come out, and we'll have the CMMC requirement. A lot of these contracts are not ready. They're not going to qualify for the contract. So they're going to have to rush and get ready. If not, they're going to miss out on revenues. It's been an exciting journey. It's a lot of fun.
Well, talking about journey, let's peel that in a little bit more. Where were you born? Are you from Austin, Texas? Did you relocate? What's the story?
So I was born in the country of Lebanon, and I was born there, and I came to the U.S. in the late 80s to go to school. I've been in Austin ever since, basically, except a couple of short stints that I left. But I've been here. I went to University of Texas for my undergraduate degree and worked, and then went back and got my graduate degree also from the University of Texas. So been here since the late 80s, 4 kids later, married, love the Central Texas area.
Oh, it reminds you of Lebanon, doesn't it? Hot and humid.
Austin is not as humid as you'd think. Houston is different, but Austin is hilly. Definitely will remind you of Lebanon. Lots of green space, lots of water. So contrary to popular belief, Lebanon has pretty much every terrain except desert. It's very hilly.
Ironically, the only one it doesn't have is probably the one everyone assumes is the only one it has.
That's right. Exactly.
So let's go back. You came to the U.S. as you were entering your adult years. You came to study in the U.S. You grew up in Lebanon. What was that like to go from Lebanon in the 80s to now the head of a cybersecurity organization in Texas with multiple mergers, acquisitions, and buy? You've been all over the map in our industry and the surrounding ecosystem. What was it like growing up in Lebanon? What did your parents do? Was this where you saw your life going?
No, absolutely not. But that's not where I thought that I'm going to end up, sort of, but not exactly. Let me just give you some background. So I grew up during the period where there was a unfortunate civil war in Lebanon. I think we've talked about it at the conference and at several of the conferences over the years, but I grew up during the time where there was a civil war, a very brutal civil war in Lebanon. So that's kind of what I grew up with. I find it fitting that I went to the MSP, data center industry, whatnot, where things are very high stakes and the stress levels are usually off the chart because you don't want to cause an outage or whatever.
I have to imagine those stress levels are nothing compared to what it's like with bombs going on outside.
Exactly. That's what I always told them. It's like, nobody's dying. We're okay. We're going to get through this. We're going to be okay. There's nobody dying here. But for sure, growing up in a war zone with moments of peace, I would say the civil war in Lebanon had periods of war, but then there was periods of peace and then it'll just reignite. So that was just kind of like a roller coaster over during that time where I was growing up.
Do your parents have regular jobs? Do you just continue your life? You're going to school. I don't know if you have brothers or sisters. You kind of just go to the supermarket and you're like, oh shit, I guess the war is broken out again.
My parents said that my dad had a regular job, and we'll talk about that in a minute because it's important to the story. But for sure, we tried, this is part of the resilience, I think, of my generation that grew up during the war in Lebanon. And you're going to see this across a lot of the Lebanese immigrants that came in during that time. The resilience that you gave is that there was a group of people that insisted that we maintain our parents, the generation of our parents, that we maintain a regular life. We went to school. And then when we couldn't get to school, they taught us at home. When they couldn't teach us at home, you would find a way that we would keep the routine. You learn how to adapt and survive. And then you keep hoping for the future. You keep kind of thinking about how are you going to get out of this ultimately. This is what I remind everybody. Like when things are kind of dark, there's always a sliver of hope. And then you got to figure out like what that light is and then chase it and chase it hard. And the sun will rise the next day. It's not going to be dark forever, right? There's always going to be something good that's going to happen.
What did your parents do for a living?
So my dad worked at the American University in Beirut, worked there for a good part of his life. And actually my dad was kidnapped because of his job.
What did he do at the university?
He was the vice president of administration at the American University of Beirut. This is the time where Americans were getting kidnapped in Beirut, and specifically people that worked at the American University. The president of the university, Malcolm Kerr, who's the father, coincidence, of Coach Kerr and a basketball coach. And then he was actually assassinated in Beirut at the American University. As part of all that craziness, my dad got kidnapped. This is when we kind of start seeing red blinking lights that some of us needed to leave. And I was the oldest son, so I was the first one to come to the U.S. and go to school here, go to the University of Texas.
How long was he away for?
Short period of time. So fortunately, he was released, but there was another episode after that, and it just wasn't safe. So as you can imagine, with a war zone.
How many siblings do you have?
I have a brother and a sister. My sister currently lives in the greater DC area, and she has 3 kids. My brother still lives in Lebanon, and he has 3 kids as well.
And your parents still alive, or?
No, both deceased of natural causes. A little bit early, both of them sort of sudden, but they were great models, really served the community, really had a heart of gold, and were great role models for us. We remember them fondly, and then hopefully they live on through some of our actions, honestly.
No doubt about it. We talk about this a lot. It's not really happiness or wealth, but the real magic of success is perspective. And when you can see what it was like from a child growing up with all of this devastation around you, and you were trying to find solace in those times of peace before it broke out again, it gives you such an amazing perspective of how absolutely lucky we all are to not live in those things. And it becomes a superpower to a certain extent. And I'm speaking only from your experience. Obviously, I did not grow up as a child of the Civil War, but it just seems to me that it would be so devastating that there's nothing that life could throw at you that would really get the heart rate up, because what living in that environment was like.
Hopefully we can keep it that way for our kids and grandkids, where this would be a place where they'd never see that. Hopefully. That's kind of like my resolve, is that how do we keep that from happening to other people and to our kids and grandkids?
You have so much stuff going on around the world. Your lived experience is probably something that would ring true for a lot of people in the world today, that hopefully will be able to share stories of resilience like yours. So you come to the U.S. What is that process like? And how do you determine, like, you're coming to the U.S.? Sounds like your sister came to the U.S. and your brother stayed in Lebanon. So what was the determining factors of those things? How did their lives end up kind of evolving?
That's interesting. I came to the U.S. first. I always knew I was going to come in for my graduate work in the U.S. somehow, because my dad worked at the American University. I had exposure to the U.S. I wanted to come in and get my master's degree, but I think the Civil War precipitated a lot of that. I came for my bachelor's degree here.
Buy a plane ticket and come. You're in a war zone. I imagine it's not like you don't go just Expedia, right? And buy a plane ticket. Like, how do you even do it? You're sitting, bombs are flying. Your dad is kidnapped. Is he returned by the time you left?
By the time I left, he returned. But this is very interesting. I don't think I've told you that story. At the time, the airport was closed. So I take a boat to go to the country of Cyprus. I had to get my student visa. I had applied to multiple universities. I had good grades. I was accepted at multiple universities. University of Texas was the optimal one that I decided on. So once you get your acceptance, then there's something that's called an F1 visa, which is student visa. So you go get it. So I go to the American embassy in Cyprus, get my visa. And then from there, I flew to the U.S. through Paris, France one night, then Houston, Texas.
Is this your first time leaving Beirut? What are you, 18, 19 years old?
Exactly. I was 19. I had left Beirut before. Like I said, there was moments of peace. I had actually family in Houston, so I had to come in.
Oh, so you had some exposure to that. It's not like you picked Texas on a map.
Exactly. No, I had come in the early 80s to Houston. I was a young teenager and loved it, but I didn't know that this is where I was going to be. So I came in and landed in Houston. After 3 days, my family drops me into Austin and then they leave. I'm in a dorm all by myself and like no transportation, nothing. So I figured it out and it was hard maybe the first couple of weeks.
There's a culture shock, right? You're going and then you see all these folks that are pretending like they have problems. And you're like, you have no idea.
You have no idea.
What's going on? They're like, oh, where are we going to get beer? We're beer free tonight.
It's for sure. The culture shock was in the dorms, right? Because you're coming in with a completely different perspective. It's like, okay, the big film.
Do you have a roommate, your first dorm?
Oh, I did not. Unfortunately, I did not. I had like suite mates. It was like small little dorm rooms with 3 different rooms. So it was great. But no, I did not. The biggest issue was where the party was going to be, who had the biggest frat party, where we're going to be on Saturday night and Friday night. And so that was the biggest issue. Whereas like I'm sitting here worried about my parents.
Right. Your family is still in Beirut, still
yeah.
in presumably a war zone, not just your parents, your sister, your brother. So you get there, you get acclimated, you try to pretend like you're enjoying yourself when you're emotionally, you're still there. And then what happens next?
I developed lots of great friendships, but really, as I always say, it's sometimes good to kind of burn the boats behind you. Like I knew I couldn't go back Lebanon. Like I needed to, like, that's it. The boats are burned. Like this is the path. You got to go forward, right? There was no other option. So I knew I was going to have to study hard, get a job and make it. Like there was no option of going back. And that's exactly what I did. I worked through school and I was one of the very few people in the late 80s that was able to find a job in Austin. Very, very, very few people. Austin was going through a recession. Texas was going through a recession. The oil boom, the oil bust, occupancy in downtown Austin was probably something like 20, 30%. And foreclosures were everywhere. Like every pages in the newspaper, there would be 20 pages of foreclosures as an example. So it was kind of an odd time, but I was one of the lucky ones that found a job in Austin. It was a fantastic job.
What was your major? What was your desire to do that you started out in Austin?
Mechanical engineering. That's what I wanted to do. I'm a tinkerer, problem solver, and that's exactly what I did. I'm kind of a closet electrical engineer, but also kind of like my major was mechanical. So I loved it.
If you had a dream job at that point, like when your father was like, all right, take the boat, go to Cyprus, go to the US and follow your dream. What was it? I want to be what? What was your vision of what you were going to do if you had your dream?
That's interesting. That dream changed. I thought I was going to be like an engineer at first. And then when I got into it, then I started working and I'm like, I'm really better at this business stuff, honestly. So I moved into product management. So at that point, I think 2-3 years within me working as an engineer, there was a mental shift. It's like, look, I'm really better at this big business stuff, like at the big picture business stuff, strategy, business execution. So that's kind of when I went back and got my MBA and moved into product management. At that point, I thought for the rest of my life, I was going to become like kind of like a VP of product at a big company. And I was fixated on that probably for the next 10 years, right? And of my life after I graduated from business.
And before you get to the career part of it, you're in school. Presumably you're able to communicate with your sister and brother and parents that are still in Beirut trying to deal with that craziness. How does your sister end up coming? What did their paths look like?
I got to Austin in August and about the first thing I did, I got to start building community. So I'm going to find the nearest church to the university that I belong to. I'm Greek Orthodox. It was the only Greek Orthodox church in Austin. So I look at a map and it's like, it looks close on a map. So I decide to walk. And it's like, oh, it was a very long walk. So I get to the church and I'm like all sweaty. And that day it was raining. So I go in and I sit next to this family that's sitting on this row, probably 3 from behind. After the service, we start talking and I meet the family and they introduce themselves. And then lo and behold, before I left Lebanon, my pediatrician says, oh, you're going to Austin. We have a friend of the family over there. Take his number. And I had his number in my wallet and literally his phone number in my wallet. So, and it turns out I'm sitting right next to that family. So me and this guy, his name is Kareem, we become very good friends. We become best friends, basically. And then fast forward, he goes to Lebanon to visit my family, completely random, unbeknownst to me. He meets my sister. They start dating without letting me know. And then they announce to me that they're engaged and they want to get married like a year later after they meet and so on and so forth.
He lives in Texas, where Kareem's going to have some explaining to do. I'm going to invite Kareem onto the next podcast. Yeah. So you're sitting next to Kareem, whose number happens to be in your wallet. from the pediatrician in Lebanon that you look all those years before. You sit next to him, and he's going to Lebanon for a completely different purpose, right? He's not going to visit your family. Meets your sister who lives in Lebanon. Obviously, he's coming back to Texas, right? He's not going to Lebanon to live. He's going to Lebanon for a week, 2 weeks, or whatever the trip is. So while he meets her there, they start dating in Lebanon, or he comes back to Texas and they're pen pals?
No. By that time, he had moved to DC, and then from DC, he's an architect, so he moved to DC, and then from there, he went for a year to Lebanon to teach at the university. He wanted to go back and teach, and
he had a plan.
Every girl grows up to marry her own father, and he's teaching at the university just like her dad. It's like, this is my model of a man. I have just psyched the entire Kareem and your sister's relationship. All right. So then he's there for a year. They're dating. They're engaged. Then they move back. And that's how she's here. She came here with him as Kareem's wife, your best friend in college, randomly set up by your pediatrician. Amazing. Pediatrician with a side of matchmaking. So the older brother is in Lebanon this entire time, and he's established and he starts a family. And is the war continuing to go? At what point does the war?
No, that's my younger brother. That's the youngest.
Your youngest brother.
Yeah, I only have one young brother.
You're the oldest. You left. The sister marries Kareem, and you have the younger brother who stayed behind. So how does he end up? When does the war end, or does it ever end?
A lot of people will tell you that it never ends, right? Because civil wars are hard. We still talk about the civil war here in this country. It does end, like the fighting really kind of ends in the 90s, and things kind of stabilize. And by that time, he starts going to college over there, and then the bullets aren't flying. It's kind of like a sense of normalcy and all that. So, and then he goes and he gets his master's degree in London. And then he goes and works in the Middle East, different Gulf countries, and he has a wonderful career in private equity mostly.
Amazing. All right. So now I think we have the whole family is situated. We know where everybody is. So you have started a career initially as an engineer and then discovered businesses is where your acumen is. You go back, you get your master's degree. What are those initial businesses in? Are they in anything that's near what you ended up doing? And how did that play out? Because when you started, there was no internet, right? The internet is not a thing yet, right? When you got started.
But we made it happen. I was working on fiber to the home back then, and actually I have several patents in fiber optics. So I had like 9 patents in fiber optics.
Give me a year. What year are you working on fiber to the home?
In the early 90s, we were working. So the internet was starting to come of age. And so this is kind of my exposure to data centers. This is my exposure to supercomputers back then. We were putting fiber in Cray computers. We were putting fiber in mainframes, so on and so forth. So this is kind of the step before you started seeing data centers.
You're really there at the dawn of the kind of internet age when people thought it was a fad. And then they realized that, this is the way the world is going to eventually work. All of it, right? So it started in 96 also at that early stage, just before kind of the bubble burst. Where were you in that kind of trajectory? You're starting with product sales. You're at Compaq for a couple of years with HP. Obviously, you have Dell as a company that is a force of nature in Texas to this day. So you're there seemingly when the internet bubble bursts. Are you focused on
wait. No, I was at a startup. This is so cool, actually, because RLX Technologies was a startup, and RLX Technologies this is going to be a full 360. So hang on. We developed the first server blade that used a chip that was designed for a laptop called the Transmeta chip. Transmeta was a company that made these chips. So we put these Transmeta chips made for laptops, low power chips, on cards and made server blades. So it was the first company that made server blades. So this is the time in 2000, 2001, 2002 that California was having brownouts. So power became an issue because power consumption. So there were all these data centers in 2000 and 2001 that were consuming too much power. Oh, wait a minute. This is still happening now, right? Like we're still having
but just imagine what kind of power you're consuming then, right? They're consuming too much power at like what? 100 kW is too much power.
Exactly. So long story short, we developed a solution to that problem back then. And then ultimately HP bought the company.
And then you went to work for Dell again.
I went to work for Dell again because the bubble had burst and there was a lot of uncertainty in the market, as you well know. So I kind of found that island of safety. I just had my first kid at the time. Those were pretty scary times.
Let's talk about that. So September 11th and the bubble burst. The bubble bursting was right around the turn of the century, let's say 2000-ish, and then September 11th, 2001. Let's just talk about the bubble bursting for a second. You're at RLX. Presumably people are buying these things like hotcakes, pets.com and whatever nonsensical, all of these like pre-revenue, we're going to take over the world. We don't need revenue. We don't have to prove a business model. Some of that is happening today again. This is all pendulum that comes back and forth. So they're your customers. Bubble burst, right? Those companies are no longer in existence. People are now picking up their fancy Herman Miller chairs and throwing them in warehouses. Where are you? What happens within RLX? Is it like, do they fire everyone? They're like, we were kidding. This is not a real, we thought it was a good idea, but it turns out there's no customers anymore.
So this is my first opportunity to rise. So they lop off. So we had a $15 million backlog that we were executing on. That disappears just like
zero.
It goes not to zero, but probably like $1.5 million or some ridiculous number. So what happens is that the entire management team gets axed, and I wasn't in management at the time, but the entire layer got axed. So I moved to kind of run all of product and marketing at that company. It was like a one-man show, close to a one-man show. And this is kind of like where I started kind of experience like, hey, look, this is trial by fire. You're propelled into the forefront of a crisis like this. And then the company was trying to meet payroll. Ultimately, the company sells to HP, but it was a very scary period of time.
And then you move on to Dell.
I go to Dell, just a little bit of safety. Although it was interesting because this is the time that Dell was trying to figure out services. So my boss, I had worked for before, gives me a call and says, hey, look, we need you to come in and figure out the services take. We don't understand managed services in general. I said, Bill, his name is Bill. It's like, man, I don't either. He's like, well, if anybody can figure it out, it's you. Can you come in and help us figure it out? And at the time, Dell was using IBM Global Services for all their services, everything from break fix all the way to value added services, to managed hosting, to all of that. Managed services, actually.
Just outsourcing it all.
All of it. So we came in and we built a portfolio that was super compelling and honestly, like built a lot of the stuff either through partnerships or internally. And by the time I left, close to 70% of the op-inc of Dell was coming from the services we had developed. So the whole company, it was a big deal. Yeah.
So now you've had this like great corporate run with some of the peaks and valleys. And then I see that you decided to go on your own.
I went to Rackspace to pursue my dream of being like this big VP of product visionary. And I was there.
Rackspace is what you were looking for when you were on the boat to Cyprus. You found the role. And it turns out it was info hosting. Dedicated servers.
Exactly. The Rackspace was a great run. Helped the company go public the first time in 2008. It was just an amazing run. And then something happened to the questions that you both are asking. Somebody saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. One of the founders of Rackspace, the president of Rackspace, came to me and said, hey, look, we want you to go and lead this business to create a cloud business within Rackspace that would be basically the Pepsi to Amazon's Coke. So I said, man, I've never been a GM. I'm a product guy. I've never really ran sales and marketing and product and operations, and engineering, development. I've never run all the pieces of the puzzle. And they said, well, look, out of all people here, we see something in you. You behave like an owner, not like an employee. And that's the advice that I give to a lot of people that I work with, a lot of people that want career advice. Is like, always behave like an owner, not like an employee, right? You're not here for the paycheck. You got to behave like an owner. Whether you are an owner or not, doesn't matter. Like, behave like an owner. You got to own it. And just not own the problem, but also behave like an owner from a cost, from a revenue perspective. Always have an eye for that. So I didn't know what that meant. Like, what do you mean behave like an owner? And then I went, and that was a home run. That was great. Like leading a group that took the business from nothing to 100 million within 2.5 years, really gave Amazon for a run for their money. We developed OpenStack there, if you remember. So my team developed OpenStack. I was one of the originator, I guess, of that whole concept as well. One of the folks that collaborated and facilitated to bring that to the world. That was super exciting. And now, during that period of time, now I have 4 kids. So my kid is born at the end of that period. And my 4th child, girl, so 2 boys, 2 girls. And Isabel was born in February of 2010. And that gives me a different perspective at that point, because you had 3 older kids and then this kid was born, and I was commuting from Austin to San Antonio. So I had an apartment in San Antonio, and I would drive pretty much 2 or 3 times a week that wasn't going to work back then. So you had to be in the office. And so I had an apartment down there and I was pretty much in the office 5 days a week in San Antonio.
People think that when you become that lead role, that it gives you like all this flexibility because you are the man. What they don't realize is it means that the buck stops with you, right? So nothing happens unless you are part of it. And it becomes, instead of feeling the accountability to one senior manager or a couple of managers, basically all the customers of this platform become your boss. So you have that obligation. When you have that mindset, you have that obligation to them. And then how do you balance that with 4 kids and it's a 24/7, like in industry, no matter what, you're doing it, you're going back and forth. And to balance 1 kid, let alone 4, is, I can only imagine it's trying, not just for you, but for your family as well. There's a lot of that kind of, people don't really give a lot of credence to founders or CEOs' guilt, right? You just assume that from the outside looking in, they're just pursuing their dreams and they're not parenting well, or they're traveling all the time and they're living the good life. When in reality, it is a fucking struggle. And I'm not saying it's not a struggle that's worth it. I'm just saying that you have the perspective of having grown up in this kind of Civil War disrupted life, but it doesn't make like the other stuff that you've gone through any less meaningful. It's important, I think, to shine some light on it. The goal is not like you become the CEO and then you stop. No, that's when the business picks up. That's when the spotlight is on you. So take us through that journey a bit, from getting that business up and then what came after that.
So the business prospered. Really, at one point though, Rackspace realized very quickly that, hey, look, we're not going to be able to match Amazon's CapEx spend and so on and so forth, which is why we decided to open source OpenStack and kind of take our code and open source it. And we did that. But that was kind of an inflection point for me. The company had gone public. The company had done very well. I had been commuting to San Antonio and I wasn't willing to move to San Antonio. I've been always in Austin and 3 kids had been going to school here. So I decided to kind of take a little bit of a step back. I joined HP for a short period, about 1.5 years, and built the HP cloud there. HP wanted to essentially build the OpenStack type cloud. So went there, did that for about 1.5 years, and I realized that I didn't want to be in the corporate world. During that time, tons of PE firms were reaching out. They saying, hey, look, we love the success that you've had at Rackspace. Your CEO material, like CEO material. Wow. I couldn't believe it. And then sure enough, I jumped into my first CEO role at Kadero, January of 2012. I will never forget that date. That was a great experience. Kadero was a small MSP based in Kansas City. Took that, was struggling in the beginning, took that and grew it steadily, close to 35% year over year. Sold it in 2015. I stayed on with the new ownership for probably another year. And then I was recruited away by another private equity firm who honestly saw the success that I had at Kadero, recruited me to Hostway. Went to Hostway, ran the same playbook that I did at Kadero. And then within probably 2 years of my tenure at Hostway, we merged Hostway with hosting.com. We merged the 2 companies, and that's what ultimately became Entirety.
Which is a hilarious name for the thing, because it makes total sense, right? You put it together. What do we call the whole thing? Let's call it Entirety.
Entirety. Bingo.
And I think it's great. I'm reminded of it every time. We bonded over this at times. We looked at those assets simultaneously. You obviously much more seriously than me. I go to Denver a lot because my in-laws are all in Denver. And every time I'm driving between my brother-in-law's house and my mother-in-law's house, we pass the hosting.com building right off of 25. I look back fondly on walking through that thing and just seeing like all of that stuff. And I know it's a much bigger portfolio than that. Just incredible what you were able to put together, and just such a amazing career from such humble beginnings. I think that kind of drive, that accountability for the actions. And then did you see yourself pivoting to the cybersecurity space, which it seems like you're getting further and further up the stack? You started selling the servers and then you started hosting on the servers. And now you are solving some of these cybersecurity things. How is that an extension of what you built previously?
I mean, with Entirety, we focused on cybersecurity as a differentiator and compliance. So that was kind of like our shtick, because honestly, as you can tell, Hostway and hosting were the hosting businesses. And for the markets that we were going after, that became less and less differentiated. So we needed to add more differentiated, more special sauce. And we focused on the compliance verticals with healthcare and fintech. And that became essentially our differentiator. We had a fantastic combination of managed services, security services, and compliance services all kind of bundled into one. A lot of enterprises were tired of kind of doing the finger pointing where they had an MSP and an MSSP, a compliance provider, right, that is helping them with the compliance. So they just wanted kind of like a one-stop shop for HIPAA, high trust, PCI, ISO, you name it.
The one thing that's always resonated for me is like everybody wants a single throat to choke, and who's got a more chokeable throat than I do?
Well, you have an absolutely amazing story and an amazing journey. I think though we have known each other for a while, it's interesting how things come along, and what we don't know is what we don't know. A couple of things that you've said that have actually really hit a home run with me. One is the fact that you grew up in an environment that there was this continuous uncertainty. You didn't know probably, and that's just me speaking, if there's going to be a tomorrow or what does tomorrow look like. How have you actually taken those experiences to apply that in your life? And secondly, not to get really philosophical over here, how do we actually get that to the parties and people and students, the younger generation, and share those experiences where they should recognize of how difficult life is for 99.99% of the people around the world versus where we're at. We are less than 0.1% of the population that's able to sit here and talk about what we just talked about and develop this platform and infrastructure. And how do we go about bridging that gap?
Absolutely. It's our duty to give back. I totally agree with you. And in this last year, I spent a lot of time mentoring people, guest speaking at various universities, helping people with their careers. This is something that is really core. I've started writing a book. I haven't published it yet. I would say 90% done. It's not a biography. The book is just putting my experiences into perspective, into actionable things they can be doing. So hopefully none of them are going to live through a civil war, but they need to understand that things can change on a dime, that there are such things as black swan events. But during any of those events, even if it's a black swan event like a 9/11 or whatnot, you got to keep your cool. You got to keep your hope and faith. You got to make sure that there's going to be a better day tomorrow. And as long as nobody's dying, like you're going to live another day and you're going to be stronger because of the experience. And it's only a bad experience if you don't learn from it. But if you learn from it, then it's a learning experience. The whole theme of the book is that make a difference in everything that you do. The title of the book is Make a Difference. In every single thing you do, you got to move the ball forward. Keep moving the ball forward, keep inching forward and make a difference in your life and the life of others. Because the way that you bring value to this short life that we live is by adding value to others. If you're not adding value to others, you're not going to achieve your own dreams. You're not going to achieve your own potential.
I think you talk about being humble and humility and look at life from other people's lenses as well, because what you have could be taken away very easily. And we live in a very privileged society, and we've got to do the good for the humankind globally. This has been absolutely amazing. I've got goosebumps. There's so much more to learn and talk about from your experiences. As we come to a close over here, what would you tell your younger self? And or also, what do you tell your children? And what to do, what not to do, and what's the future like?
I will tell you this. One, always pick something you love to do, but also be humble enough to know what you're good at and then focus on that, because it's got to be a combination of what you love to do, what you're really, really, really good at. And then also you got to have perspective. You got to look around and ask the question, is somebody willing to pay me for this thing that I love to do, this thing that I'm really good at? Pay me enough to sustain the lifestyle that I want. If you can combine these three things, then you're in your magic zone. I would have been in my magic zone maybe sooner. And then that would be the advice that I would give everybody, is just like really introspect. What do you love to do? What are you really good at? And then have a outside perspective into what the world is willing to pay you for. And is it enough to sustain your lifestyle? And then after that, give it your 100%, give it your 150%. Go after it, because you're going to be passionate. It's not going to feel like work because you love to do it. And you're not going to feel like, oh, I'm underpaid, because the world is willing to pay you what you deserve. It's not going to be perfect always, but try to angle for that kind of optimal combination of these three things. That would be my advice.
Brilliant. Well, this was great. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Can't wait to see you at Infrastructure Summit in a few weeks. And I'd love to learn more about what you have been doing and what the future entails.
So
Well,
happy
thank
to
you.
get this super inspiring story finally as platform. It'll make a lot of difference.
Well, both your journeys are super inspiring. And then what you guys are doing on this podcast is super inspiring. I appreciate what you're saying, but your journeys are equally inspiring more. So I appreciate what you're doing. Yep.
Awesome. Speak to you soon. See you soon, personally. And thank you so much. This has been Emil on Nomad Futurist. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Nomad Futurist Podcast. Remember, technology, markets, and challenges will continue to evolve, but those who adapt and prepare are the ones who will thrive. Embrace the change, stay curious, and let's build a future worth moving towards. The journey has just begun, and we're glad you're here with us. Visit us anytime at media.nomadfuturist.org to stay connected and be a part of the movement. Until next time, keep exploring.